Hi everyone, I'm James Martin, and you're listening to What's Left.
When I said, hey, hey, what's wrong with you? I wanna turn you round upside down just to see you smile. You know I'm gonna be there until the morning.
And I'd like to introduce my fellow hosts. You've got Sean Holtall. Hi, Sean.
Hi, James. How are you, mate?
I'm very good, thank you very much. And we've got Renee Barnett as well. Hi, Renee.
Hi, from across the pond, everyone. How are you?
All very well here across the several ponds actually. We've got the Atlantic and the Irish Sea.
That's true.
Quite a few ponds to skip over, so to speak. Yeah.
Yep.
I suppose the first thing to say is on the day of recording, this is the day after Independence Day. How are you feeling about independence? Has it been worth it, Renee?
Well, yes, I would say yes. But however, with our independence at risk here in the United States today, with all these laws that are being enacted by various states that discriminate against people and groups, it kind of is a little bittersweet celebrating Independence Day. I know someone sent me a cute meme yesterday that said the 4th of July has been canceled because of lack of independence. Sincerely, women.
I can't
wonder
think
who
you
that
might.
was. Yeah, I did share that a few times with people because it's so true. I mean, I never thought there would be a time when, we would have less rights than what we've enjoyed for many, many years. And, we've made so much progress in so many areas, including, civil rights and LGBTQ rights. It's just, it's incredible to see them being rolled back the way that they're at least attempting to be rolled back. And some of them are being successful. But I think they're going to pay the piper in terms of general elections, because I don't think that the general population of the United States likes any of this stuff. It's just a small, loud group that have gerrymandered their way in to power. Sorry, I didn't mean to start a rant. I think you were just asking me a simple question.
No, well, it's right. Well, we might as well, we've started, so we might as well finish. I mean, so there's some news from Florida, which is having a bit of a backlash. The governor, Ron DeSantis, has a very anti-LGBT, very anti, it seems anti anyone that isn't him.
Yeah.
And that's having some economic consequences. I don't suppose you could expand on that for us, Renee.
Well, I mean, I don't have any data, but I'm sure there's data to be had. But just from observers in Florida, the lack of tourism that they're experiencing. I mean, that's Florida's thing, is their retirement community and tourists. That's what keeps Florida afloat. And as it stands now, the tourists just aren't coming in as they. I saw a really interesting guy. You guys might want to look him up on TikTok. His name is Greg, the Uber driver, and he drives around. He's a retired teacher, and you can tell by the way he speaks and by the way he collects information and then shares it back. He asks all of his riders, hey, where do you work? What you're doing? What's going on? And he's found, a decided difference in not only the types of writers that he's getting, but in the amount of business he's getting. Right now, he says he's running at around 2/3 of the normal business that he gets. And in one of the videos, he goes out to Orlando Airport, and it's, middle of the day, and it's just almost empty. And he says he's dropping a few people off at the airport to leave Florida for various reasons, either for a trip or whatever. But he's not picking any tourists up coming in. And I know that the farmers in Florida are having a terrible time because they've got no workers. Immigrants are fleeing Florida like crazy. And now these jobs are sitting there with no one to do them, because these are the jobs that, people have cried that, immigrants are taking away, but yet they're the jobs that these same people don't want to do. They wouldn't, lower themselves, quote unquote, to do that type of work. So we're going to end up with a big problem as far as food production and things like that. It's just starting. So we're going to see the results of it down the road with lack of produce and things like that. And I know that it's being looked at to where to move, crops, or, to start, concentrating on other states for some of the things that we normally rely on Florida for. I would imagine, like oranges.
That's a really interesting point you made, Renee. But I just the counter for that, I don't think the jobs people don't want to do. I think the jobs that we just will not pay people a proper wage to do, and we rely on migrant labor. Where I think anything.
That's the reason.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is sort of a reckoning here where we're going to have to own up to. We cannot continue making food as cheap as we have, and keep thriving. We're going to have to start paying people a proper wage to do this, and either profits are going to be hurt or people have to put up the costs. But it'll be an interesting dilemma to see how the capitalists deal with that.
Yeah, how it all shakes out, because it is a reckoning, for sure. So it will be interesting to see how it plays out. But in the meantime, I think it's going to cause some issues, not just for Florida, but for the country at large. But, I'm not sorry to see those issues come up, quite frankly, because I completely disagree with almost every single policy that Governor DeSantis is trying to put into place or has put into place.
Well,
was taking on Disney. That was a ridiculous thing to do. But
that's really interesting as well, though, because we're talking of Disney as if it's bigger than the state or bigger than the nation. And Disney's a capitalist entity, which its only place is to make money. It's not there for any other reason than to generate wealth for the shareholders or owners. I'm not sure who owns Disney nowadays, but it's interesting that you make that point there, where Ron DeSantis has tried to take on Disney as if it's two nations sort of locking heads. And yeah, it's interesting.
Well, only because Disney is the biggest employer in Florida. I mean, you're going to, can I say piss off your, your biggest moneymaker? That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And it's certainly not for any, altruistic reason. It's just for hateful reasons. So, no, I'm no big Disney fan. But it's like, I do like to see someone fighting against these draconian laws that they're trying to put into place, no matter what.
It's somewhat ironic, isn't it, that Disney, that started out, Walt Disney, a very famous pro-Nazi, as a supporter of Hitler, is now as an entity in the corporation is going against essentially some what I would consider fascistic, state legislation. I suppose history is a cruel way with irony, doesn't it?
It really does. And you know what? I don't think many people know that aspect of Disney history here in the United States. As we tend to do, that's another thing they're successfully doing in Florida is, just erasing history and parts of history that they don't like. So that's, I'm sure, one of the things that's just been tamped down. We just don't hear about that sort of thing.
And I think with American history, there's not going to be much left that's not been erased from it if you're taking out the embarrassing parts.
Tell me about it. Tell me about it. And, they're banning all the books, so you can't learn about it on your own. So I don't know. I don't know where this is all headed, but it's certainly no place good. But I will say this. I think it does have to get really, really bad and really in your face unfortunately, for people to move and take action.
I mean, I've been thinking that myself in the UK for the past part of, the last 13 years, certainly. And constantly thinking, oh, it must be bad enough now. Maybe people are gonna throw these Tories out, but it's never come.
It's sort of like when Trump was president, and he would do something horrible or embarrassing or whatever, and we would say, "We got him this time. This time is going to be the time," and then it would just end up blowing over, and then the next thing would be a little bit worse, and then a little bit worse, and now we have, an indicted former president of the United States for the first time in history.
Well, and things do have to get worse. I mean, people have said in the UK, the Tories are going to lose their seats. They're going to lose and all of this, and it's like, no, because until the people who call themselves middle class end up, having not to shop at the expensive shops, until they're affected, there's never really any change, and they act as a sort of weight against the interest of the majority. And it's the same in the US as well. I mean, people vote against their own interests because we're not poor, we're a temporarily inconvenienced millionaire. That approach, and yeah, I know we said that we would wish the NHS a happy birthday at the end of the show, but I've got to mention it. It took tens of millions of people to die in a global conflict before Britain got an NHS, before the United States got a New Deal, before Europe got the Marshall Plan, which really was a sort of anti-Soviet thing. But do we really have to slaughter each other so much before the survivors get to help each other? I'm a firm believer that ordinary people, just ordinary people, the default position isn't let's go to war. Most people I've met, the default position is let's help each other. Most people. There are, of course, if you can say piss off for now, I'm going to say arseholes out there who are very pro-war, who love flags and borders and whatever else. But the majority of people, it would help you if you fell over in the street. It's just the anchor and chain, if you will, is upon these people whose obsession is with money. And
just for those people outside the United Kingdom, we're talking about NHS, the National Health Service, there in the UK. We don't have one here in the United States, so obviously we're not talking about the US. But it's interesting. Even people that are involved in national health, some medical workers and things are sort of like hoodwinked into not supporting better circumstances for themselves. You know, it's like, oh, you know, you can't strike because you're going to leave your patients to die if you do that. You know, I wouldn't do that to my patients. I have a friend who's a nurse in the NHS, and she wouldn't participate in the strikes. And I thought, I see what you're saying, that you don't want to leave your patients in a lurch, but at some point, you know, something's got to give, something's got to change. And if you don't stand up.
Generally, those nurses treat the NHS as, you know, quite often, and this is a stereotype, it doesn't apply to everyone, but generally you'll find people like that, you know, don't really have to do the job, are often sort of on the right wing fringe of conspiracies and, you know, the sort of tinfoil hat territory. You know, and actually, you know, it's a thin slither of nurses in the NHS. A vast majority have supported things like industrial action. Really do believe in the NHS. You know, really do overwork. However, there are some people who clock off when it's clock off time, and despise things like, well, little things like, you know, that social support and all of the rest of it.
Right. Yeah. Well, what is the situation? Is it going private now, Sean? Do you know? The NHS, what's the latest on what they're trying to do with the NHS?
I don't think there's much to update. The British Medical Association, the junior doctors, are currently engaged in dispute, as far as I'm aware. I joined them on the picket line a couple of weeks ago now to speak to them for a little bit at my local hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And they're the future of the NHS. They're the people who do most of the work in the hospital, them and the nurses and the sort of ancillary staff. So yeah, it's people are sort of, if you've got medical professionals taking industrial action, like you said, people often care about what they're doing, and sort of it gets spun into you don't care if you're going to strike. The fact is, we should be paying these care professionals a proper wage, something they can live on, something where they're not having to use food banks. It's absolutely crazy, and we worry about a shortage in staff when years ago we removed the nurses' bursary, so nurses are now having to get riddled with debts before they can even qualify and get out there and earn what often isn't enough to live on. And it's worrying there, but we're going to have to start paying our nurses and other healthcare professionals properly if we're going to have an NHS that survives. Because it's all well and good governments talking about building new hospitals. The hospitals aren't the problem. We can't staff the hospitals we've got now. So who are we going to staff these new hospitals with if we just start building the capital stuff?
I think the other thing to mention is, you know, on top of, like I said, I just wanted to address that very thin slither of people who just treat it as a job, not a vocation. There are always going to be people like that. And yes, you know, nurses, frontline medical staff from most of the Western economies, to be fair, not as much in Europe, certainly in the UK, certainly in some aspects in the US and Canada, have had pay cuts. You know, inflation has outpaced their rate of pay, and they're looking at moving to usually places like Australia, etc., etc. But it's not just the pay, which is odd for me to argue this. It's not just that; it's all of the other things around it. Where countries decide that, for example, there'll be no state funding of mental health support, suicide support, drugs and alcohol support, where you have Sure Start, where you have a long hours culture, where stress and elevated cortisol levels, you know, can cause all sorts of health issues. It's all of that combined as well. So in, you know, some European countries, there's been cuts to services. I'm not sure what money's been saved. I'd certainly be interested to find out where the money's gone. In places like the United States, where some of those services are really dumped on the charitable, charity sector, as is increasingly happening in the UK and Ireland, for that matter. Where there isn't a national support system, all of that means that the cost of health becomes much more expensive. And what I mean by that is the absolute demand on there. So here's what happens. You look at the demand element, and the private sector says, do you know what? We can rescue our own. What we can do is we can take out from this system, public hospitals, etc. We'll take out the people who can afford to pay us and leave everyone else in a two-tier system. It's like an evacuation plan for the wealthy. Meanwhile, the absolutely essential services. I mean, if you just think, going on too much of a rant, but you just think about this. What do you need to be healthy? Well, a varied diet is one thing. Well, we know that the cost of things like fruits, vegetables, organic produce, things like that is very expensive in the supermarkets. And without people getting decent pay rises, health takes a tumble there. So what do you do in order to afford to eat? You have to work longer hours. The average American, I think it's very nearly 3 jobs that people just have to keep going. We're not that far behind in the UK. So you have to do that in order to afford to eat. Well, unfortunately, you're not going to be able to afford to eat because now a manufactured energy crisis has occurred. So you're going to have to make a choice in wintertime whether or not to heat your house or whatever. And of course, that has a detriment. So it's the entire piece is what I'm saying. It's a much bigger picture. It's a choice. And it's a choice of right-wing governments who are obsessed with stealing money from people, from the state, for their own benefit, and leaving the rest of us to suffer.
It's a mess.
Well, that killed that one, didn't it?
Now I'm depressed.
but the excitement is in the fight back.
Yes.
And that's just it. I think it was Nye Bevan who said that we'll always have an NHS as long as there are people willing to fight for it, or words to that effect. And that's just it. And I think the beauty of the NHS and why we've managed to preserve it for so long is because it's universal. We're not means testing. If you've got money for private healthcare, we're not excluding you. It's open to everybody. So everybody has a stake in it, and it's all of ours.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that's probably a difficult concept to understand over in America, but I think we're so ingrained in society. I think it's the biggest employer on the planet as well. So I think everyone knows somebody who works in the NHS in this country. Yeah. So we've all got a stake in defending it, and I think eventually things may get worse, but we will turn it around because we've got no other choice. We've only got to look at the state in America to see we cannot afford to lose healthcare here.
Oh my goodness, no. Yeah, I mean, as much in turmoil as NHS is, at least it's there. At least you have it. And I mean,
it's 75 years old today. It's 75 years old today. I suppose the question is, will it make it to its 80th, let alone its 100th?
Yeah. 75 years.
There's a communications blackout in the UK about the privatization of the NHS, which is very interesting. You won't find the BBC reporting the vast swathes of the NHS have been given to the likes of Richard Branson so he can enjoy another yacht at the expense of people's ill health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just amazing. I was thinking about it this morning about how Orwellian, everything, has turned out to be. And how could, he have possibly been so prescient, to see that it's the way that people have taken over the conversation. Who was it? Who was it, Jay, that said, he that controls the press controls the world or controls power or something like that? It was a dictator that said that. But anyway.
There's, yes, there was a Nazi general who, or I should say fascist, let's be clear about it. He said, if you want to figure out who controls you, figure out who you can't complain against and all of that. I think if we just stick to, and that general most certainly was not putting it from a polite perspective that we might understand.
Right.
I think if we just stick with Orwell, though, and look at this, essentially the people who can afford the print presses and social media, we're seeing again, this, the robber barons, the turn of the century, the very famous the Morgans and all of this from the United States. We're seeing this again, aren't we? Apart from this time, the battle for the control of minds. There's no such thing as public opinion, just published opinion. For example, as Churchill, he was right in that regard. We're now seeing a battle for Twitter, for Facebook, for all of these social platforms where people are regrettably getting their news from. And we're sort of there at the turn of the last century, again, building bigger and bigger empires. And I just wonder which one's going to fall.
Well, I was just listening to some news on that, on the, the new platform that Meta, Mark Zuckerberg, is getting ready to launch, called Thread, which is challenging Twitter. And of course, with Instagram and Facebook and whatever else Meta already owns, they've already got millions and millions and millions of subscribers. I mean, I think they could really come out of the gate, challenging. I don't think it's going to take that long to build. Now, I mean, Meta is another problem, but honestly, I'm welcoming this bar fight or whatever it is we're getting ready to see between Twitter and Meta, because I know that Facebook is responsible for a lot of disinformation, and but I don't know what it is. There's something about Twitter since Elon Musk has bought it, and I used to kind of admire Elon Musk, but he's just come out with so much horrible stuff. Plus, I don't like the way he treats his trans kid. That I just, I'm just off Elon Musk all the way. And, I'd love to see Twitter just go by the wayside, honestly.
I think the issue is, I mean, first of all, it's interesting to me, all these capitalists trying to build monopolies when they all preach that the driver of innovation is competition, but yet straight away we'll try and stamp out any competition. But also we need to be careful what we wish for. We don't want to have one person controlling all of the sort of social media platforms. And I don't think any one person should be able to control any one of them. I think social media now, we need to look at how we move forward with how we interact with it and how it interacts with us. And I think there's some very, very salient points on that. We need to start looking at how we democratize it truly. And whether it's, if, as Elon Musk called it himself, it's the sort of town square of the internet, Twitter, when he was buying it. Let's make it that. Let's take it back. Let's democratize these platforms, have them held in common for us all. Because I think that's, if it's not, it's very dangerous letting one or a board of people decide on what our opinions are and how we're swayed.
Yeah, I mean, there's already talk
Well,
about
can I?
Meta being so big that they're going to have to break them up. You know, that the regulatory agencies will ultimately break them up if this new platform is launched, which I guess it is. So let's see if they do that or not. That would
Well,
be.
can I put a controversial thought out about social media generally? I think it's coming to an end. I think Facebook is a dying service, and I think that Twitter. I wouldn't have suggested this, but since Musk has taken over, it's prompted the death of that. I actually think what we're going to see, I mean, if you just look at, younger people tend not really to bother with Facebook accounts. It
No.
generally seems to be Instagram and TikTok and things like this. Well, the nature seems to be more sharing of photos and sort of short videos. And actually, Facebook tends to be used for messages and for phone calls. There seems to be a move away from posting stuff because it's very repetitive. It's actually quite dull. And when you see, especially this generation that's coming through now, the generation of the school strikes, they really do get that there's a lot of bullying, whether that's direct or indirect, that goes on through social accounts. And there seems, like I say, there seems to be this big move away. It was the reason I think that Facebook bought Instagram, and this sort of sharing little headlines and all of that. Twitter's essentially shattered itself into lots of competitors without the need, oddly enough, of regulatory without regulation. So I just wonder whether or not it's self-defeating, and I wonder which government is going to be brave enough to regulate.
Probably France or Germany.
The European Union, I would suggest.
Yeah, the entire European Union, more like it. I know that they do call those platforms to task much more, or at least it appears so to me, than we do here in the United States. They have certain regulations that they insist upon. I think there's a big deal going on in France right now with Meta about harvesting data and sharing it, with other interested parties, I guess, as a moneymaker for Meta and on all those platforms. So what France is trying to do is to have them not be able to share any data from French subscribers without their express permission.
That's the thing, isn't it, though? It's any of these platforms that are free. If you're not paying for a platform, then you're the product. And without being able to harvest and sell your data, there's not much use in them giving you access.
Yeah, I guess that's the way they make their money. They need a few more billion.
And that is ultimately the other than the water wars that are upcoming, the battle for data, we're already in the midst of. The growth of what's interesting for me is the way in which this needs to be tackled is the closing of bot accounts. And unfortunately, one of the only ways that you can do that is to verify that you're a human. There lies another problem, though. I certainly would not be comfortable in providing any passport information, any identity information to a private company. And I think what we will end up seeing is perhaps it will be the European Union, some sort of identity code that is operated by nation states that you will need to verify your social account.
I, for one, am looking forward to when Twitter is just 8 million bots talking to each other.
Yeah,
Why isn't it? Isn't it?
it's happening now.
And just to clarify for the LGBTQ plus community, when we're talking about bots, that's not what you're thinking about.
No,
So there we are. But yeah, if you think about the spread of disinformation, maybe future historians will look at this period as the information wars. Brexit most certainly was impacted by, as we know, not just Russian but other state players, corporate interests, using bot accounts, using data against people. We know that the election, the following year, following the Brexit referendum in the United States, the same happened. We have seen this in France with the rise of the far right again. In Germany with the Alternative for Deutschland party. We're just seeing this everywhere. It's very easy to manipulate people. And I have to say, very easy to manipulate people as they get older. One acquaintance of mine said, "Oh, I can't be manipulated." And yet the next thing that came out was the sharing of messages from a far right group.
Yeah.
So there is going to have to be something in terms of regulation. We can't allow these people to self-regulate. It just doesn't work. Look at the financial crash if you want more on that.
And slightly on another subject, but not really, because we're talking about bots, troll bots, and that sort of thing. But now that Yevgeny Prigozhin and the Wagner Group are sort of persona non grata, supposedly, from what we can see in Russia, what happens with the troll factories that Prigozhin was running? Did they just does the state just take them over and still use them? Because those guys were pretty sophisticated, and they certainly did, and it's been proven, influence the presidential election on behalf of Donald Trump. So,
they're also influencing the debates on trans issues. There's a lot
totally.
of accounts, a lot of this woke war and whatever else that is. The influence. To answer your question, of course they carry on.
What do you think's going to happen to Prigozhin now?
I think he's a prized asset in Belarus. They've got a war criminal who had access to Russian intelligence, deployments, ordnance, and I think he'll be a lovely asset for them, and he'll run his criminal mercenary gang of thugs from there.
But why would Putin let him live?
Oh, well, look at it the other way. Why would Prigozhin let Putin live?
Beats me.
War criminals are very interesting bedfellows, aren't they? And ultimately,
I mean, I can't believe that he would that Russian President Vladimir Putin would allow Prigozhin to leave the country and go into Belarus, where if you're saying that they may view him as a big asset, it's like, everyone knows that Belarus is at the behest of Putin.
Let me put it in another way. There isn't a war that has been fought where the head of state has been killed by the other belligerent power. There's not one.
Right.
There's lots of reasons for that. You don't kill the head of the other person's class system, because then people might get the idea about you.
Yeah.
Equally, in Russia, that depends on many mercenary groups, including ones set up by the United States and Britain and all of the rest of it, terrorizing Africa still to this day. You don't go killing the head of mercenary groups, because then you won't be able to recruit any more of them. Yeah, and I think it's as straightforward as that.
Yeah.
But and again, let's be clear as well. Belarus is not really an independent state. It's in a twin system where Russia essentially controls, its foreign affairs, money, monetary systems, legislation, and all the rest of it. So for those listening, if you want to have a look at the Republic of Belarus, you will see that it is essentially I forget the exact phrase, but it's essentially conjoined to that of the Russian Federation. It's not really that he's been exiled to another country, just a province really of Russia.
I mean, Lukashenko strikes me as being, certainly deferential to Putin, and I mean, I kind of see him as a puppet. Am I wrong about that? Do Sean or James, do either one of you have any knowledge about Lukashenko? And
this is a million miles from my expertise, so I will hand over to James.
Well, of course he's a puppet. He's there at the behest, the last dictator of Europe. Is his title. So, yeah, of course he follows what Putin does, because again, and as something falls behind you there, Renee.
I know.
Whoops.
I'm trying to hide it with my head, my big head.
That's it. But yeah, of course, what you have essentially here is, old dictator. There it goes. Old dictators looking after each other isn't any real surprise to anyone. And again, I would just say that all warfare is a civil war of humanity. So the notion that one state, I never thought in my life I would hear the word annex outside of a Victorian or imperialist book. But there's lots of things going on. We're not that clean in the so-called West. I don't really like that phrase, but we're not. And God forbid, another country ends up invading another, and it's all a big mess. All of it's very profitable for particular people. If you're a mercenary or you're in the weapons industry, bumper profits. Now that's the way that it is. So yes, of course, again, Belarus is essentially a fiefdom of Russia. That is the reality. They do follow where Russia leads, as do a few other states for that matter.
Yeah, and I'm sorry to say I didn't get a chance today. Maybe one of you did, to hear any news about the nuclear power plant in Ukraine that Russia has ordered be evacuated by their people by today, by July the 5th.
Yeah, they've completely undermined it with various, not just landmines, but dynamite as well. So it would seem that, I don't know, they're planning some sort of planned detonation. For those in the UK, Fred Dibner style, but we will see. If that happens, that's going to be exceptionally dangerous.
Yeah, and it looks like, I don't know if this has to do with the Airstream or whatever, but I saw a map yesterday, at least at current conditions, that if there were to be a nuclear explosion or leak, that it would actually head most of the fallout would head toward Turkey.
These things, you know, with Chernobyl, these things were also suggested, and it didn't. It headed straight over Western and Northern Europe, causing untold damage to those people in the hilly parts of Britain, Norway, I think even Ireland. You know, we know from history we don't detonate nuclear sites.
I mean,
Sure.
this is something that, you know, affects the whole world. I don't understand how the whole world isn't like jumping on this one situation.
Because we don't have any more nukes being detonated. That's the reason. Sean.
Yes, just I think we're only got a little bit of time left, but I think it would be crazy of us not to look at what's going on in France at the moment.
Absolutely, you're so right.
So you got any updates there, Jay?
Oh God, it's just me talking. Well, yeah. So, for those who perhaps aren't that familiar as to what it is that's gone on, essentially, and we will just keep it brief. A 17-year-old has been killed by French police forces, who claimed that it was a 17-year-old driver of a vehicle who didn't have insurance. There was a random check. Police then have said, well, he tried to get away. He was a danger to the police, and that's the reason that they executed him. Video footage has demonstrated that that was a lie. The French police lied. And numerous video footage has attested to that. The French government, just as other governments do, straight away, the police are brilliant and the police are great, which didn't look too well when evidence was presented that proved that the police, hold on to things, everyone, lied. And that has caused the pressure cooker, which is pretty extreme at the minute in France, to detonate across the country. Oppression by police forces, you know, things like this. I'll just share a story. I mean, I was stopped not that long ago, really not that long ago,
For the same reason.
The same reason, yeah. A random check. There was no insurance. Well, it's not that I wasn't insured. I just hadn't displayed the correct sticker and what have you. It was all sorted, and off I went. Now, was that because I had the right skin color? You know, is there a sort of paint chart of we better shoot you because you just look different? And that is on top of the pensions, on top of the rise of the far right. One thing that's not being discussed is that the police force, not all of them in France, obviously, but a large chunk of the French police are right-wing and are members of Marine Le Pen's Rassemblement National and the old National Front. That needs to be discussed.
Yeah, we have the same problem here in the United States.
It's not. To be fair, it's not just in France. We see this in the United States. If it's not people killing kids in schools, it's the police choking people to death. Or again, can we also? I mean, I would just say this. This issue has affected me. You know, I'm describe myself as being heartbroken, but it's the inner anger that I feel for any sort of intolerance. Can we stop saying the words "was shot by police" and start using what we're actually describing here, which is they were executed by police? You know, no 17-year-old, you know, versus the might of the police force is a real threat to them, not when the police force are armed to the teeth. In the US, the police forces have tanks.
Mhm.
You know, in Britain, you know,
They have to here because
they've got smaller problem.
everybody's got an AR-15 here. I guess the police have to. I mean, I remember a time when that whole automatic weaponry thing started coming into vogue here in the United States. And there was a period where the public was definitely better armed than the police forces. I remember one in the 90s, we had a bank robbery, a brazen bank robbery here in Los Angeles, one of the Bank of America branches. And these guys had automatic weapons and were just going around, you know, shooting everyone. And the cops had to go to a gun store and get automatic weapons in order to fight these guys. It was really crazy. They didn't, you know, arm the police with those types of weapons. But it's like one thing is pushing the other bad thing. You know, it's like people with weapons, you know, make the police have to be armed, which make the police more deadly than they need to be. And it's amazing to people in the United States that some police forces are not armed. It's like, you know, well, how can they be the police if they're not armed?
Well,
It's yeah, and I mean, when I grew up in sort of Britain, policing was more a community thing. You'd see police officers walking around your community, and they'd know everyone. They were from the community, and they tended to care more and engage that way. Where we've seen the militarization of the police, and if you dress someone up like a soldier, they're going to behave like that. And soldiers are used to being at war. It's sort of the militarization of the police has made them, the police on that side, and other people feel that we're in conflict with each other when it should. Community policing works. I think where we see it around Europe and certain parts of the UK, still in smaller rural villages, you see a much better sort of relationship between policing and how we consent to be policed. I certainly don't think dressing someone up in military garb and sticking them in a tank and giving them an automatic weapon is going to do anything other than make someone feel like they're going to war.
Yeah, not very inviting to a nice
no,
guy.
and I think just as we, you know, we're coming up to the end of the show, it'd be a useful reminder, just for those who are listening in the United States, of someone that you refer to as a founding father. That's Benjamin Franklin. You know, and his words are important. Not all of them. Some of them are a bit debauched, but most of them, at least the public ones, are those that we should note. So, you know, any country that gives up a little liberty to gain a little security loses both and deserves neither. And that really is the case, isn't it? You know, if we, I can't add any more to what Sean's just said. If we militarize the police, I mean, we saw this during the miners' strikes in Britain, or as I call them, the first British Civil War, because what you had is army dressed up as police. That seems to have been the sort of beginning, at least in Britain. Flogging off old tanks and ordnance from the military in the US to the police forces. We don't need it. We don't need weapons.
Just, you know, either one of you, Sean, you know, in a country like America, where I can't remember, I wish I had it off the top of my head, how many guns there are in the United States. A lot more than there are people. But how would you go about approaching a sort of, you know, revising the way we police with all these guns out here? I mean, how can we disarm the police without disarming the public?
There's got to be a sort of reset. You've got to look at getting police officers from the community to police that community. And there's got to be trust built again. There's got to be a recognition that those police officers are there to serve and protect that community. I think the minute that they're put in conflict with the community is the minute it all goes wrong. We've got to trust that our police officers aren't going to get shot by doing that, protecting and serving. And I think the escalation and this sort of arms race between criminals and police is only going to go one way if we don't sort of de-escalate now. But it's a tough one. America is just seems to be very obsessed with sort of owning killing machines. I don't know how you go about that, but
I've got a suggestion. How about a weapons amnesty? You get free universal healthcare if you cash in all of your weapons.
Yeah, but they've made universal healthcare here sound like the devil. So I don't think that's it. I think that's a bad thing, because they've been told that.
Well, I'm sure if they get shot, they'll figure out just how expensive that is I'd rather have a shot than say a booster rather than be shot. I have to pay 100 grand and all of this.
Yeah.
But here we go. Oh, we're at the top of the
guys,
show.
I enjoyed it with just the three of us today, going over some current events and things, and I'm kind of depressed now.
Well, don't be depressed. I suppose, well, what's left? Well, yeah, the state of nations is a particularly grim one. And in an odd way, I mean, I'm sort of paraphrasing maybe some Buddhist principles here, but how would you know what good is unless you know how bad things are? It should be the drive for us all. If you're not happy with the way that things are, then get involved in groups, get involved in political parties that align with your political viewpoint. Get involved with the labor union or the trade union movement. If you're not happy with your wages, there's always movements that you can get involved in. And just make sure that those movements are about helping people, not about killing or discriminating against people. If you get involved in that, then things can change rapidly. Let me just say this. At the end of the Second World War in Britain, as we celebrate the NHS's 75th, hopefully it will get to its 76th. But as the country was broke, Britain was broke, there was no money to fund the old lifestyle. And yet, in that absolutely impoverished state, everybody came together to nationalise, not just rail, all transport, mines, steel, etc., but created something that was unique. And that was a health system that provided healthcare from glasses to dentistry. It isn't free at the point of use. You do pay a tax for it, but it was important for people that when they walked into the GP, the general practitioners, or their hospital, that they weren't met with, how would you like to pay? Or what insurance have you got? That happened in a very short time. In the 6 years of that Labour government in Britain, it has taken 75 years for the Tories and, I would suggest, other parties to do what they can to dismantle it. So I'll just say this. We can change the world. It does take a little bit of time, but it doesn't take anywhere near as long as you might think. And that, happy birthday to the NHS. I've been James Martin.
I'm Sean Halsall.
And I'm Renee Barnett. Long live the NHS.
Absolutely.
Happy birthday.